Hey everyone, welcome to the channel where I will try to help you create some high quality 3D assets or environments. And this is episode 2 of our own environment project where we start from nothing to eventually build out a fully finished environment. And I want to take you through on how I do it, and maybe it helps you creating your own environments. And I'm super excited to share with you guys what we're gonna do in this episode, because we're gonna make our scene looking like this to our scene looking like this, which is a full environment. You now have nice views from the building, which we didn't have before, because as you can see from here, the view is now very inspiring. We kind of want to change this up, and now adding all our buildings in there, it fully looks like a full city, right? And in this episode, I'm going to show you how to use some very important game industry tricks in creating something like this, saving you a lot of time, right? Because creating every building uniquely would be very time consuming, and we would be another few years here. So we're going to use modularity. I will explain you all about that later. And also the Unreal Engine blueprint system. This system is going to come in very helpful for placing all these buildings procedurally and saving us a bunch of time placing all of these manually. So now that we know what we need to create, let's jump into Blender and start making our buildings. Oh, stop, not too fast. Before we jump into Blender, I first have to show you this right here, because I want to go in further depth on how we're going to tackle the buildings. As you can see in the center, we have an environment, which we done in the last episode, and now we're tackling the buildings, but you see they are split up in two different sections, right? We have our mid detail and our low detail. Since we don't want to put the same amount of detail in every building, as you can see, we're talking about hundreds of buildings. If we put all the same amount of effort in them, we're just going to waste a lot of time. We're going to be spending a lot of time on things that you're never ever going to see, right? And it's also even going to look noisy at some point. So our mid detail are the ones close around the building. So let's say around 500 to 1,000 meters radius around it. And they are going to have a little bit more detail. And this is how we're going to do the procedural workflow. The workflow that I'm going to explain to you in a second into Blender. Now, these buildings consist of enough detail, so when you're closer to it, when you're looking out of the window, everything is looking really nice, right? So the environment will have the most amount of detail, then the mid detail will be the buildings around it. Now, we also have the low detail buildings. Those are the ones far away in the distance that you're not going to see close up. And they're going to be done with the blueprint system, being procedurally placed and kind of procedurally constructed. I will show you guys in a second or later in the video on how we do this, which is really, really cool to do. I cannot wait to show you guys this. But these buildings will have the lowest amount of detail, right? So now that you know the structures of the buildings, now we can actually go into Blender and we can start with the procedural buildings, where I can explain you what the procedural workflow is and how we're going to apply that to our buildings. So in Blender now, I built a scene to show you guys what the modular system is and how strong a modular system can be, right? In short, it is basically Lego pieces, tinier pieces where you can make all kinds of shapes from, that you can also model out, of course, but it's gonna save you a bunch of time since you only work on one piece at the same time. And once you export it into Unreal Engine and build it up, any changes that you make to that piece is gonna be applied to everything, right? So if you can see on this building over here, it's all unique. Every vertex over here is just unique. So let's say we're further in the process, I wanna make some changes to this railing. Now I have to manually make all these changes to all of these railings, or like just making it to one, then copying it to everything. Now you can already see this is not ideal. This is not the way that we want to go to work, especially on buildings that lend to be so good for procedural workflow, right? Now, I have two procedural examples. As you can see, one is split up in less elements and the other one is split up in more elements. Now, none of these are either good or bad, or better than the other. It all really depends on what your needs are. For example, in my case, since they're going to be background buildings, I do not want to have a million little pieces to have to build in Unreal Engine, right? Since I don't need that much difference in all of these pieces, since they're going to be further away. So
I would like to have my example as modular one example, where the pieces of the building are split in as little as possible, right? So we have a corner. I all made the material IDs different for different pieces. We have the corner, we have the window, we have the whole balcony module. Then for that, we have all the edges of the roof as well, right? The ones that fit with the wall pieces. And in the center, to fill up the roof, we just have a square. A square, this one is 4x4. So in total, it will fill out. On the other one, we have the same building, but now split up in more pieces. We have the window separated, we have the door separated, we have another window separated, the railing and the balcony. That's all that's different. Now, you can go further than this. We can also start adding drain pipes, right? Or some other elements. Let's say there's a little wooden plank in front of the window. We can make that a separate piece. It all very depends of your case, right? If you're going to be very close to this building, you might want to have a lot of different pieces to be able to switch out. If you're going to be further away from the building, you might want to have as least amount of pieces as possible. So it is easier to build in Unreal and it's easier to manage, right? Now there are some, not necessarily rules, but definitely some tips that I would like to give you guys in order to make the modular system as strong as possible. Since it works the best when it is easy to place around and easy to build up, right? If we look at this window over here, it is all within the grid of 1. This doesn't have to be exactly the grid of 1, right? Like 1 meter by 1 meter. You can see the squares on the grid over here. It can also be half a meter, it can be a quarter meter, but as long as it is within a certain amount of the grid. This will make it building a lot easier, because if I want this piece next to it, I just have to move it 4 squares, and in Unreal Engine we can make it snap every meter, right? Now if I want to move it again next to here and I want to rotate it by 90 degrees, again, since it's on the grid, it makes our life so much easier, right? So definitely an important thing to think about, because trust me, I made the mistake enough where you don't build on the grid and you end up with a house with a lot of holes. And that's basically the house that I'm living in right now as well. It's very old, so it is very cold in the winter. It's not something that we want to build in our 3D scene, right? We want to have it airtight, and the only insulated house that I can actually, live in. So these are the important things to live by, right? We have our grid size. You can break it up as many parts as you need, the ones that are the most convenient for you. So that's why the modular system can be really fun to play with. It's basically, if you look at something that you need to make, you can see it as a puzzle, and where would you make the cuts in order to be able to make this building with the least amount of effort, with the most amount of variance that you can play with, right? So I hope that this example really helped you to understand what the modular system is, and now we can actually start building our buildings with this system. So let's jump into a different scene and start building our first house. And that is our first building done. Now, a few things to note is notice that this roof is split up into separate sections. One that is the size of the full length of this modular piece, and one that is a little bit of a different size, which is the corners combined. Since with this building, we have an uneven amount of pillars on each side. Doesn't matter how we build it, if we add another piece like this, just the way it is designed, it means that we cannot have an even number in here. So in order to fix that, We have a smaller piece over here, which is just the combined side of both corner pieces, since this is 5 meters and this side is 4 meters. So combined, this is 9 meters. And this one is just 28 by 28, which is the full side of 4 of these modular pieces right here combined. And as you can see, if we just want to add more length to it, that means that we can just copy this, right? Put it next to it and keep building. And we only need one of these since we only have 2 corners on each side, right? This is the same in this direction, but what does that mean is that we will always end up with a small square as a little gap. So we have a smaller square right there. So the roof is separated in 3 pieces. Now there's another thing that I wanted to show you guys, which is a technique that I very often use, especially when we're working with corners over here, and it is an easy way of mirroring a corner. So let's say we created this piece over here and we want to have a nice 90-degree angle. The way we can do it is we can add a quick empty with Shift A, and normally I just tend to add a cube. Let me snap it to grid with Control selected. And there are 2 ways of doing this. If you have hard ups, you can just select this, Shift select this, then Alt X to mirror. And now we can rotate this, right? This is the same that you saw me do in the time lapse. And the nice thing about this modeling or changing anything is very simple. Still, we don't have to really worry about having a 90-degree angle to work with. Since we just have this modifier, right? Now, if you don't have this modifier, if you don't have hard ups, it still works the same. You go into your modifier panel, you go in here, you click on mirror. You can find that right here. And now you just have to make sure that it is mirrored by object. So we just select this object and we rotate it, right? Now, the reason why this is happening is we need to make sure bisect is on, and now we just need to flip it to the other side. As you can see, doing it this way, still totally possible. It just takes a little bit longer than just with the Hard Ups plugin being able to press Alt X and mirroring. So these were 2 things that I wanted to go over in the time lapse. Now, one building is good, but we need a few more to add some variation. And since the process is very similar, we just have to snap our fingers. And with the magic of editing, we have all kinds of new buildings over here. To quickly go over it, I try to make them quite generic. Is we have this one over here, which is the simplest out of all of them. It just exists out of 4 pieces. And as you can see, since we don't have to deal with any unevenness, we can just have simply one roof piece over here. This one, I wanted to have a little bit more variation of it. So we have 3 different pieces right here that we can just exchange. We have this balcony in length, we have just windows, and one with the balcony in the center, which I consider like the front piece. Besides that, we just have our corners and our roof lining. Now, this is the one that we're all familiar with. This is another one, a bit more of an old school building that I really like the look of. And again, similar style as this one, we have the penthouse, which looks a little bit different than all the apartments below it. So we have the apartments below, we have the corner, and then we have the penthouse corner and the penthouse top. And again, the reason why I wanted to show you guys this one is because here's the only where we could not have an even roof. On the other ones, we all have an even roof. Which makes it so much easier to create it, since it is literally just a plane. Same for this one over here. And you guys might recognize this one, since this is the one of our modular example, just a little bit changed around. So these are all our buildings, so let's get them into Unreal Engine and start building them up in there. Alright, so now I've imported everything into the engine and we can start building the buildings. Now there are a few ways that you can do this. You can either do this by just dragging out the buildings and start constructing it in here. There's only one issue with this, and that is it is still uniquely placed. So that means if we ever want to add some detail to the side of the building or on top of the building, we will have to apply this to all of the copies that we might do of this one, right? You can select it, you can press Ctrl G to group it, but still, if we want to make multiple copies, since we definitely want that, we will still have to apply changes to everything individually. Now, there's a better way of doing this. What you can do is you can drag this one in, select them, and then right-click, and we're going to create a packed level actor. So this is like a level instance, and for the people that might know Unity, it's like a prefab. So I go here, I create this building test. Let me save this up. And there you go. It will create a blueprint and it will create a level instance. Now, as you can see, clicking on this right now, we cannot do anything with it, but we can right click on it, add level, and then we can edit it. Now, this just works as any normal scene that you would work in. So we can just go into here, we can start dragging our corner pieces in there. We can make whatever changes we want in here, right? And it is a very fast way of making a building. Now look at this beautiful building over here. And when you're done with it, you can just right click, level, and then commit. You can also discard, but committing means just saving. And as you can see, we can still have multiple versions of this. Go in here, and if we make any changes, and commit that, it will be applied to all of the instances that we have in here. So this is very strong, especially since we're going to work with many buildings and we want to reuse as much as possible. So building these buildings is quite a tedious process. It's going to take quite a long time. So I will be back once I'm finished with that. And there you go. I finished up making all the buildings. So as you can see, I'm building 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and from all of them, I have a different variation. For now, I will keep it like this, but maybe later on when we start building our scene, we figure out that we might need a few more iterations.
Now, wait a minute. I know what you're thinking. What are these? These are literally just square buildings. There's nothing nice about this. But don't worry. This is just the first stage. This is a block out. What we're gonna do is we're gonna add a bunch more detail in the roof, because the roof at the moment is just flat. But also the shapes, we now only have square ones, right? Because we want to on purposely have generic ones, since we don't want them to look too much duplicated when we add them in the scene. We also need some flavor in here, and we do that with unique buildings. The unique buildings are gonna have a little bit more of interesting shapes. So they're gonna look fantastic in the scene, in the skyline, but as you might know, we're not gonna be able to place them everywhere because they're gonna look unique, right? And it's gonna look super repetitive when we do that. So this is why we have our generic buildings, and now we have to start making some unique buildings. Okay, let's see. How to create a unique building. Okay. Woo, that's amazing. So helpful. Wow.
Now, this is obviously not how you create the buildings, but since the modeling process is so similar to all the buildings that we've created here, I thought it would be better just to show them within Unreal Engine. And as you can see, the shapes are very different from our more generic buildings, just so it contrasts nicely, right? We have some more curves on it, we have some more interesting detail on it. And once we add these to the scene, like I said, we have some nice variation in here, right? Now, we already have a nice impressive kit to look at. There's only a few details that are missing. Now the roofs are all boring, right? They're all flat, there's nothing on here. And as you see in a real city, there's actually a lot of detail in the roofs. You have vents, you have ACs, you have like the little buildings on top of it, so you can actually walk up and get on top of the roof. Now I just gone ahead and also created that, since it is a lot of time to create all of these. And the process is again very similar to what we've done before, right? And as you can see, I have some roof layouts that I created, some roof buildings and some vent presets. So let's go through exactly what this is made of. So first off, it's very similar to our procedural buildings. We have the roof buildings. The roof buildings is just like a little kit where you can make all kinds of different buildings with endlessly. One difference is here, I really wanted to be able to make an L shape or a corner inside. So I created that module there. And you can see I created a few different versions, right? And all of these, again, are level instances, just so it is easy to place around. Now, for the vent presets, I just created a modular kit for the vents. And again, created some level instances, so I have some presets that we can throw in this over here, which is the roof layouts. And the roof layouts exist only out of a very few props, right? We have some AC units, just a different variation, so we don't always have exactly the same looking thing on the roof. Now we also have an air filter, then a sunroof, and this is the vent kit that I have. As you can see, the kit itself is very basic, very simple, since it just exists out of 4 pieces, right? But from all of this, we can create some really impressive looking details for the roof, right? We can make endless variations with this, and if we ever feel that we need something more, we can just add that in as well. Again, I approached this the same way as I did for the buildings, and I created level instances. So once we start placing these in the level, if we want to make any changes to it, let's say we want to add drain pipes or cabling or some set dressing on top of here, it will be applied to all the roofs on the building, right? But now we're going to see how impactful this is going to be for our scene. Because if you now look at our buildings, right, we have an empty roof. If we just unhide this layer, we're going to see all of the detail, all of the sets that we created on top of these buildings, right? And out of nowhere, they go from basically looking like cubes with not a lot of character to something that has a lot of character, right? And also a lot of detail, an impressive amount of detail for the little amount of props that we created for on top of the roof, right? Now I'm getting really excited to start building all of this out in our actual scene and start going from a scene with no view to a scene with an amazing view. But before we do, we still miss one element, which is the blueprint buildings. The ones that are going to be very low detail, but all around the scene, just to give the impression that this city is going to be an endlessly huge city. And to do that, we're going to create this blueprint right here, where you can add different kind of buildings with different kind of roof modules on top, and it all randomly places and randomly rotates. Now, if this bit might be a bit too technical, don't you worry, because I also have no idea what I'm doing. This blueprint is just a combination of a Frankenstein project of combining different elements that I either read on the Unreal documentation or from some elements from tutorials that I followed and tried to combine to create this monstrosity over here. So let's open the blueprint and see how this actually works. So this is all the logic it needs in order to create these buildings and place them randomly. This first part of the script is a modified version of a tutorial that I followed from Oscar Cassander. Let's hope that I not butchered that name, but he did an incredible job of showing how to make a procedural building in the blueprint system. And I would definitely recommend you watching that if you want to know how this actually works, because I won't be able to tell you. I just tried some stuff out, modified it a bit so I can get a grid-like pattern. And if you want this in your scene as well, I will make sure that all the elements are visible so you can reconstruct it in your own blueprint. And for the second part of our script, we added an array since we wanted a list of meshes so we can add random meshes where we want. And I found this part from a documentation on the Unreal Engine on how to kind of create an array and how to plug it into a static mesh, which has been very helpful. And I do the same process for the buildings and also for the roof pieces itself. Now the building location is driven by the previous piece before, but for the roof we needed to add a little extra element. Since for the roof it cannot just be in the same location as the building, because then it's going to be in the bottom of it and you're not going to actually see it. So we need to know exactly the height of the building. And we do that by looking at the mesh that we created and then get the local boundaries and look at the z-axis, right? From how high this building is, and we plugged it in here. So this is the whole logic of the blueprint. I won't be able to get too in depth on it since this is a very new field for me as well. But I hope it helps you if you needed something like this, or just showing you that you don't need to have an extensive amount of knowledge in order to create some things in the blueprint system. We don't have to be scared of it because we can just play it around, see what works, and it is very intuitive to work in. So now we finally have all the ingredients to create a recipe in the actual scene and start building our nice view, our nice skyline for our environment. So let's actually start jumping into that and start building out our nice overview. And finally, everything is now placed and the city is looking alive. We have the blueprint buildings in the background here. And you can see it makes like a radius around the more detailed buildings. And when we go a bit closer to the scene, you see that we have all the modular buildings around it with the nice roof details. And when we start looking out of the window, you really see this layering going on, right? You have close by, you have the more detailed buildings. And then further away, just as volume, it's very subtle, but just as volume, you see all the tinier buildings in the background, right? It really sells that this feeling of a bigger city than if it would just end over there.
I am so excited on how this whole scene is looking right now and the progress that we made on the environment. And I want to thank you so much for watching. If you made it all the way till the end, I really hope you enjoyed it, or maybe that you learned something from it. And I cannot wait to continue with this environment. The next stage that we're gonna go into is gonna be for the next video. But before we leave it, I wanna go for a few beauty shots through our scene to just admire what we have been doing. And thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye bye.